Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. It's so wonderful that you've joined me today for part 2 of our fabulous story. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. So we're on part 2 of our story today, but before we start, don't forget to go and get yourself something lovely to drink. So let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. I inwardly sighed, for it would seem talking about my husband's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Finnegan, was not a conversation I really wanted to have, as my memories of the first time I stayed in their beachfront property, only a couple of weeks after me and Gally got married, were far from pleasant. Sonia Finnegan had gone out of her way to make me feel most unwelcome, and the whole 3 days I'd spent in their house, I'd felt exactly like a fish out of water, as if I didn't really belong in their space. Sonia Finnegan had gone to the ends of the earth to show me how much she actively despised my presence in her home. She looked on me like you'd look upon a cockroach if it had crawled into your shoe, with a large measure of repellent disgust. It didn't matter that I came from a small town in Vermont. Sonia Finnegan thought I was trailer trash, the kind of girl that had grown up with a mother who was a detestable drunk, and a disconnected, insouciant father who was never around. She created in her own head an objectionable narrative about my biological roots that seamlessly appeared to accommodate her snobby elitist attitude towards me. Over the course of those 3 insufferable oppressive days that I spent in her beachfront home, she had looked down on me in such a patronizing, uppity manner, and barely acknowledged my presence in her home, doing her utmost to avoid me. I had overheard her husband Connor taking his wife discreetly to one side in the living room of their home. I had heard them talking about me, as I was on my way back from the kitchen with a glass of milk in my hands, and I heard mention of my name, so it got my attention, and I very quietly tiptoed towards the doorway of the living room and eavesdropped in on their clandestine conversation, which affirmed what I already knew. Sonia Finnegan couldn't stand the very sight of me, and abhorred having me as a guest in her own home. "Sonia, you're not treating our daughter-in-law right. She's Gulliver's new wife," Connor Finnegan was saying to her. "Try to be nice to her, will you? You're making it perfectly clear you don't like her. That's not a kind thing to do. Actually, it's very nasty, vicious, insulting, and extremely offensive, giving her the silent treatment in the way that you are. How would you feel if my parents treated you so disparagingly, like this?" I was grateful and somewhat surprised that Gully's father Connor was sticking up for me, as he was a quiet, very unassuming, polite man, who didn't contribute much to the conversation, so I knew very little about him, but it seemed he had seen in his wife a treatment towards me that he found objectionable. "You think I should make the likes of that dreadfully ignorant piece of trailer trash welcomed in our home, do you, Connor? She's a traitor, don't you see that? Lydia belongs with Gully, not this ghastly woman that our son has the brazen audacity to call his wife. It's a joke. That's what this all is, an absolute joke. Whatever induced him to pick her up over any other woman, God only knows. Gully could have any girl he wants, and he chooses a woman like her. She's not even pretty. And as far as brains, I'm not sure she's actually got any. She doesn't give me the impression that she's got much going on upstairs. I mean, Lydia, well, she's got a master's degree, has she not? And she's so beautiful in every sense of the word. She's got style and oodles of taste. Lydia is a thoroughbred. As for Sandra, she's like a cart horse. Not much use at all. Love, listen to yourself. Your words are so unkind, so full of vicious spite. I don't care if Lydia has a master's degree. It doesn't mean a thing. Since when has a university degree ever defined your character? And as for beauty, well, it isn't everything, you know. Although I think Sandra is an attractive woman, but not in the way you find a woman attractive. Because Sandra is not sophisticated enough for you. I get that you loved Lydia, and she was a nice enough girl, but she did wrong by Gully. You've never admitted that, have you? You need to realize, Sonia, that our son has moved on with his life. He's fallen madly in love with another woman, who is the antithesis of Lydia in every sense of the word. She's more wholesome. She seems to have a big heart. You have callously decided to hate her simply because she's not Lydia. Isn't your attitude a bit extreme?" "How can you say that, Connor? Are you trying to insult my intelligence or something?" "I'm doing nothing of the kind, love. God forbid. I'm just pointing out the facts. I don't think it would have mattered who Gully brought home with him. If you want the truth, I don't think it would have mattered who Gully brought home with him. You would have hated every single woman that he introduced us to as his wife, if they weren't Lydia. You are also extremely crushed that you weren't invited to Gully's wedding in Vegas, so you're blaming his new wife for it. You do realise that both Gully and Sandra are divorcees. They decided they wanted a small, little, simple affair in Vegas. There's nothing wrong with that. For a second wedding, you don't need a fuss, nor any extra expense. It's a frivolous thing to do, totally unnecessary. I think going off to Vegas to get married was a practical decision for them to make, and a sensible one too. But then you would say that, Connor, wouldn't you? Because you're just like Gully in that regard. You love to save any penny you can," said Sonia Finnegan, crying out indignantly. "You haven't got a clue what on earth you're saying, Connor. You're always jumping to wild conclusions. It's so typical of you. And you get everything dead wrong for your information. You can live in denial, sweetheart, for as long as you like. But I know you better than you know yourself. You're completely outraged. I can see it in your face. You are upset because we aren't included in our son's wedding. Well, we weren't included. You feel snubbed that we weren't invited to Vegas, and upset when he announced he'd met someone else that we knew nothing about. Go on, admit it. You were put out about it all. But this is not about you, love. It's about our son and his lovely new bride." "How dare you say I'm in denial, Connor?" said Sonia fiercely, the tone of her voice extremely defensive. "If you are wondering why Gully was so secretive about the new woman in his life, I'll tell you why," said Mr. Finnegan. "He didn't want you coming along, throwing a spanner in the works, destroying his new relationship. He knew you'd be upset that he was getting remarried, so he decided to go off to get married in Vegas, and to be done with it. And frankly, I don't blame him. I'd have done much the same if I was wearing his shoes." "He told you this?" asked Sonia's astonished voice. "Did he actually tell you this?" "No, he didn't. I guessed as much. I know what you're like, love, all too well. As far as you are concerned, no one is good enough for our Gully, except Lydia, of course. You're incredibly biased as far as Lydia is concerned, and it's ridiculous." "I like Lydia very, very much. She was like a daughter to me. But this dreadful woman, this imposter that our son has brought into our home, I don't like her at all. I blame her for guilefully whisking Gully off to Vegas like that. It's such a tacky thing to do. I wouldn't expect anything less from a girl like her. And to think she's married our son. Oh, it's too horrifying for words, it really is. She's not the kind of woman I want for a daughter-in-law. It seems that Gully's taste in woman has fallen by the wayside. He's completely lost his way. He's chosen someone so dreadfully plain, so unfashionable in every sense of the word. She doesn't even wear makeup. Someone who wouldn't know a Louis Vuitton purse from a copy. Well, if you must know, I like the fact that Sandy is a fresh-faced young woman that doesn't engage in any airs and graces like Lydia so obviously did. And who cares a toss if she doesn't know an authentic designer purse from a copy? That's a very, very silly thing to be concerned over. The only thing that's horrifying to you is that Gully is not with Lydia anymore. You can't get over the fact that it's over between the two of them, and it's eating you up alive. So you think spitting out your venom at Sandra is going to drive her away from Gully. But I hate to break this to you, love. Anyone can see that the two of them are very much in love. You're going to have a tough time if you try to split them up, let me tell you. They think they're in love. There is a difference, you know. Gully really loves Lydia. I know he does. He's just refusing to admit it to himself because he's hurt. But he doesn't realise how very good Lydia was for him, and how much he's lost. It's not over between them, I know it isn't. said Sonia Finnegan firmly. "If Gully would just open his eyes, he might begin to realise what he had with Lydia. Why he threw her to the curbside so heartlessly, I cannot understand. But I'm hoping with time he will realise what an idiot he's been." "Gully is remarried, love. I hate to break that to you, but it needs to sink into that head of yours. He has a new wife, and he's very happy, thank you very much. And the sooner you accept that, Sonia, the better. I may remind you that Lydia did the dirty on Gully," came Connor Finnegan's frustrated response. He sounded somewhat aggrieved that he couldn't get through to his wife Sonia, for it was rather like talking to a brick wall, as in Sonia Finnegan's eyes, Gully's ex-wife Lydia was still very much on top of a pedestal. "How many times do I have to remind you, Sonia, that Lydia betrayed Gully's trust by sleeping with his very best friend? Now you don't do something like that. You seem to conveniently forget all that, and I'm sorry, but it's a very big deal. I wouldn't be with you any more, Sonia, if you had slept with my very best friend. That's how these things work." "You wouldn't be with me, is that what you're saying, if I'd slept with your best friend? You wouldn't forgive me?" "Of course I wouldn't forgive you. The trust would be gone, that would be the problem. I'd like to think I had a little self-respect. Is it any surprise the relationship between Gully and Lydia is over? I don't mean to be unkind, love, but quite frankly you're stuck in a time warp, and you're going to be left far behind if you harp on nostalgically about the past in the wistful way you do, and try and act as if nothing has changed, when everything has changed. If you are very aloof and insouciant towards Sandra, you're not going to exactly endear yourself towards Gully. Wishing things are different all the time. You need to accept Gully is in love with Sandra. You cannot dictate who our son loves. It's not your decision to make. Gully has got a mind of his own." "I know that, Connor. I'm not stupid. But at the same time, I am Gully's mother, and I'd like to think that my opinion counts for something." "Sorry to burst your bubble, Sonia, but you have no say in the matter, and your opinion does not count. Not any more. Your influences over Gully's life are at best paper-thin, and will get increasingly more fragile if you continue to act like you are, like a sulky, petulant teenager. Your attitude towards Sandra is both juvenile and childish, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Our son is an adult now, a fully grown man. Some of the choices he's going to make in his life may not please you. It's the way for every parent out there. Ask any parent you like, and they will tell you that when their kids grow up, they can't tell them who to vote for in the elections, who to socialise with, what job to accept, where to go on holiday, or who to marry, or how many children to have. You have to accept the fact, love, that our son is not a boy anymore. He's the conductor of his own symphony, playing all the tunes that suit him best, and some of his choices you're not going to agree with. Just like you and I, although we love each other very much, we don't agree on everything, do we? Can you not at least be happy for Gully? And please be kind to his new wife. She seems a nice enough girl to me, but all you can do is pick fault at her, and it's not her fault she's not Lydia. I've noticed you, Sonia, giving her dagger looks, making her feel most unwelcome in our home, and you should never do that to a wife of our son's, who I may remind you could potentially become the mother of our future grandchildren. You need to see the bigger picture, love." "I am seeing the bigger picture, Connor. I happen to think that our son was much more suited to Lydia, but he's far too stubborn to see it." "You can live in denial as much as you like, Sonia, but your wistful dreams of getting Lydia and Gully back together will never work. I can tell you that right now. Would it really hurt you to be civil to our new daughter-in-law? Gully knows you don't like his new wife. You've made that painfully clear by sulking and actively ignoring her. And when you speak to Sandra, you're extremely condescending. When she arrived here, you were practically telling her how to disguise her tree-trunk legs. That's an insult, love. She's not a heffalump and you know it, but you insinuated as much. I dare say it's very upsetting for Gully to see you treat the woman he loves with so much disdain. If Sandra were to treat you like you are treating her, I would be very upset about that. If you continue in this manner, treating Sandra with so much disrespect, then I very much suspect Gully's visits to our home will become few and far between. And I'm sure you wouldn't like that, would you, Sonia? Think about it. Why would Gully want to visit us if you made it blatantly obvious you hate his brand new wife? It's true. I do wish Sandra was Lydia. But can you blame me for that? Sonia admitted. Lydia is so perfect. She's beautiful, classy, elegant, upmarket. Sandra, well, she's a little dumpy, don't you think? Not nearly as beautiful as Lily is. I couldn't believe Sandra claimed to have won the field and track when she was a kid at school. Can you believe that? I wonder if she made that story up. She doesn't look at all athletic. I mean, honestly, look at her now. She probably wouldn't even manage the egg and spoon race without carelessly dropping the egg. She doesn't strike me as desperately nimble. I'm sorry to say this, Connor. It's like our son has downgraded from a Rolls-Royce to a clapped-out Peugeot with an engine that is seriously impaired because there's so much gunk inside it. When I heard my mother-in-law saying that about me, I hurriedly scurried away. I'd heard enough. But I do remember closing the bathroom door behind me, putting on the taps at full blast, so no one could hear my sobbing. It hurt me to the quick hearing my new mother-in-law describing me in this fashion. It was so vindictively unkind, so heartless, and it really stung me to the core. I did not even want Gully to know what his mother had said about me, as he would have gone after her all guns blazing, telling her not to upset me, and giving her a huge telling off. I really didn't want to create any more chaos or discord over a 3-day weekend, when I was getting to know my in-laws better, and trying to make Sonia see that I wasn't such a bad person. So I kept what I'd heard to myself. I had no idea what Lydia looked like or anything about the woman, but it really hurt being compared to her, as it would seem Sonia Finnegan thought Lydia was perfection itself. I had heard her describe me as dumpy, and yes, I admit I was a few pounds overweight, but I was just a little plump, in a Bridget Joneses-like kind of way. But Gully found me beautiful, and that was all that counted as far as I was concerned. Besides, you can lose weight, can't you? But you can't always lose a stinky attitude, the one that Sonia Finnegan was so obviously engaging in. She may not have liked me terribly much, but the feeling was definitely mutual. How could I warm up to a woman whose heart was as cold as ice? I vividly recall the first time I met Sonia Finnegan. I had been nervous as anyone else would likely be in meeting their in-laws for the very first time. Mrs. Finnegan had not exactly been kindly disposed towards me, even before I arrived on the scene. So I wasn't expecting a rapturous welcome, especially since me and Gully had gone off to get married at a ceremony in Vegas, and the only person to witness our wedding was a complete stranger off the street, who we had invited to join the ceremony, and as Gully pointed out, the man was as high as a kite, which in itself was hilariously funny, now that I come to think about it. When Gully announced to his mother that he'd met someone and just got married over a phone call, Mrs. Sonia Finnegan was not remotely amused, and it sounded like she was quite affronted and put out by this shocking revelation. I think she felt cheated, as if she and her husband Connor had been deliberately discluded from an important ceremony. But both me and Gully were divorcees, and so a fancy wedding would not have been on the cards for us, for we had absolutely no desire to splash out on a wedding ceremony with all the trimmings, as that would be an excessive unnecessary expense. What would be the point of that? Besides anything else, we'd been there, done that, and got the T-shirt. We didn't want to have a big bash, which of course pleased Gully, as he hated parting with extra money. But he can be generous at times when he chooses to splash out on me. But I had teased him on countless occasions for being so dreadfully penny-pinching. But pulling the reins in financially on a second wedding, that I could completely understand, as weddings are frivolous at the very best of times, and we didn't need to be frivolous about ours. When Gully called his mother to tell her the news that we were now married, he had put his cell phone on speaker, and then he broke the news to her. But judging by her horrified reaction, anyone would have thought someone in the family had died in a calamitous tragedy. "What is that you're saying, Gulliver?" Everyone I knew called my husband Gully, so I chuckled when I heard him being called by his full birth name. But I was to learn later that Sonia Finnegan could not stand her son being called Gully, but there were times when she slipped up and accidentally called him the shortened version of his name, when she was off guard, and when she did that, she seemed to scold herself. "I was saying, Mum, I've got some great news. Very good news, in fact. I met a girl." "You met a girl?" came Sonia's voice, followed by a stiff, uncomfortable silence. "So you've got yourself a new girlfriend, have you, Gully? Isn't that a bit soon after Lydia? I mean, you've barely just got divorced, and you've flung yourself into another relationship. Isn't that far too soon, love? You need to take things very slowly, one step at a time. Rushing into things is a very big mistake, and I personally don't encourage impulsiveness of any kind, if you want my wizened advice on this matter. Mum, I'd like to remind you I divorced Lydia over a year and 6 months ago. That was quite a long time ago, don't you think? I need to move on, start a new life for myself, put the past finally behind me. There's no point in dwelling on past mistakes and looking back. I'm sorry to say, Gulliver, but I always thought your ending the marriage so quickly with Lydia was an overreaction on your part, and as a consequence you lost the very best thing that ever happened to you. Lydia was an asset. She never meant to get drunk that night, and the only reason she did was because you had upset her so much. Can you blame the poor woman for being so distressed? You really laid into her, Gulliver, going on and on about her being excessively extravagant. She was begging you to get the kitchen refurbished, for goodness sake, which I quite understand in the circumstances, but you put your foot down, didn't you? Made a song and dance about it all. You obviously don't understand that to make a woman happy, you should give in to what she wants, just a little bit. And had you done so, this dreadful debacle would never have happened in the very first place, and Lydia would not have been tempted to cheat on you. It was a dreadful misunderstanding, love, that you took far too far. Mum, she did a hell of a lot more than kiss my very best friend, and you know it. She went home with him. She was gone for a couple of days, and she'd have been sober by then. She returned home 2 days later, expecting me to take her back and forgive her for sleeping with my very best friend. Credit me with a little dignity, will you, Mum? You really think I'm going to take Lydia back, when she spent an entire weekend warming up another man's bed and crying on his shoulders because I refused to refurbish a brand new, perfectly adequate, well-presented kitchen at excessive unnecessary cost? How low can you get? It was a mistake, love. Why didn't you realize that Lydia has always loved you? She made one little mistake. Drink can do that to people, you know. Lower their inhibitions. But Lydia was so good for you, love. Such an upstanding woman, in every sense of the word. If you call cheating on me upstanding, Mum, then we've got different ideas on what the word actually means. You were always biased as far as Lydia was concerned. She could never do anything wrong in your eyes. That's not true, son, and you know it. So tell me about this girl you've met. How long have you been seeing her, love? Well, for a year, to be precise. A year? And you didn't think to mention this to me? Gulliver, that's appalling of you. Absolutely appalling. You've been with this woman for a year, and you don't tell me. I'm your mother, for goodness sake. If anyone should be privy to know what's going on in your life, it should be me. But these days you're so elusive. Everything you do, Gully, is shrouded in secrecy, and I don't like it one little bit. When people ask me how you're doing, Gully, I don't know what to say to them, because you never get in touch with me these days. And that's very naughty of you. Well, there was nothing to tell you, Mum. That's why I didn't contact you. But now there is. I've got some great news, Mum. Very exciting news, as it happens. I hope you can be happy for me. What news is this, love? Why have I got a funny feeling I'm not going to like what you're about to tell me? I'm married, Mum. You what? Came Sonia Finnegan's voice. She sounded as if she was choking on a piece of sausage that had got dislodged in the back of her throat. You heard me, Mum. I got married. I'm very happy. I'm very much in love with my new wife. She's a very beautiful woman. I think you will like her very much. She'll be a great fit for our family. And if you know what I think, I'm very glad things didn't work out between me and Lydia. As Sandra, she brings out the best in me. I'm a better man because of her, and a whole lot less stingy. I've been buying her flowers and gifts, and for me to do that, well, it's a breakthrough, isn't it? You've got married, Gulliver. Are you completely insane? You've only recently come out of a marriage, and now you've entered into another one, on a whim. At this rate, you'll end up exactly like Elizabeth Taylor, having more ex-wives than you know how to count. I didn't get married on a whim, Mum. I'm in love. I told you, I'm very happy. And you thought not to invite me and your father to the wedding. I'm very disappointed in you, Gulliver. I feel extremely hurt by all of this. Very hurt. Mum, I had a big wedding with Lydia, didn't I? At great unnecessary expense. I may remind you of that. And then the relationship went pear-shaped. I thought this time around I would do things differently. So we went to Vegas and did it that way. It was inexpensive and a great deal of fun. We had a fabulous time together, and I don't regret any of it. Oh, I despair with you, Gulliver. I really do. What on earth were you thinking? What about your new wife? Did you stop to think for a single moment that she might have enjoyed a big white wedding with all the trimmings? Weddings are very important, you know, to a woman. And it's incredibly selfish of you to consider your own needs first, over and above hers. You've always been very tight, just like your father with the purse strings. Oh, goodness gracious. That's one of the reasons your relationship with Lydia fell apart. I mean, she was so frustrated by how tight you were. Sandra didn't want a fancy wedding, Mum. She had a fancy wedding with all the trimmings with her ex-husband, so she wanted a simpler event like I did. Please be happy for me, Mum. You will really like Sandra, I promise you. She's a lovely girl. I can't wait for you to meet her. I know the two of you will get on famously. You're going to absolutely love her. She's a little shy when you first meet her, if you don't know her very well. But when you get to know her, she's got the warmest heart. I hit the jackpot marrying her, I'm telling you. So she's a divorcee, is she? Came Mrs. Finnegan's disgusted voice. Why is she divorced? I hope you found out the reason why she and her husband separated, Gulliver. It could be very revealing about her character. I mean, if she gave up on her first marriage so easily, just like you did with Lydia, all I can say is God help the both of you, because you're going to need supernatural help, let me tell you, to make things work. Marriage is a commitment for life, you know, Gulliver. It is to be taken seriously. You don't just bow out at the first opportunity. Her husband cheated on her 5 days after their wedding, Mum, with a matron of honour. Can you believe that? It was absolutely devastating for her. She was committed to her marriage, but sadly her husband failed her, because he obviously wasn't. She couldn't make it work under those circumstances. How perfectly disgraceful, said Mrs. Finnegan, sounding all the more revulsed. Your wife can't be a very good judge of character, Gulliver, to marry someone so willing to cheat on her like that. Either that, or she has a considerably low self-esteem. You know very well, if your father cheated on me, I wouldn't stand for his nonsense. I'd take him down with a cricket bat as hard as I possibly could. He wouldn't know what had hit him. I'd probably bury him under the patio, like they do in the movies, with badly behaved husbands. Let's just say, your dad wouldn't dare humiliate me like that. Mum, she was young at the time, inexperienced and naive. She married this guy because she was pregnant, if you must know. She has a child, came Mrs. Finnegan's strained voice, that sounded as if there were now several sausages stuffed at the back of her throat. You're kidding me! So you're a stepfather as well as a newly married man for the second time around. How old is this child? Sonia Finnegan sounded as if she was about to be violently sick. No, Mum, you've got it wrong. Sandra, I'm afraid, does not have any children. Tragically, she lost that baby. In a miscarriage. It was devastating for her. She was only 18 years old when she married her ex, and shortly after the wedding day she lost the baby. It broke her heart. She was looking forward to becoming a mother. But I guess she was so upset at the time that her body simultaneously rejected the baby. Stress can do that to your body, as you well know. 18 years old? Who gets married at 18 years old, I ask you?
with a bun in the oven as well. It's appalling, that's what it is. Does this woman you've married have the morals of an alley cat or something? Because it certainly sounds like it. I didn't even know how to kiss a boy at 18 years old. And it appears that she's jumping into bed with everyone she can find, like a dog on heat. It's utterly disgusting. Mum, Sandra does not have the morals of an alley cat. I resent your insinuations. You don't even know her. She decided getting married was the best thing to do in the circumstances, as she didn't want the baby to grow up without a father. Her parents are very religious, you see, and they persuaded her that getting married was the best thing for the baby. And so that's what she did, even though it turned out to be a train smash. The guy she married had nothing in common with her, and well, she didn't even like him all that much. Good grief, love! It sounds like she's made a great deal of mistakes in her young life, and some very bad choices along the way. You don't have to marry someone just because you're pregnant, you know. Maybe in the olden days people did that, but we've moved on from the Stone Ages, have we not? If the man was so obviously a loser, he would have messed up their marriage sooner or later. Once a toe rag, always a toe rag as far as I'm concerned. So a sensible woman, with sound reasoning, would never have married the loser in the first place. There is nothing wrong, you know, Gulliver, with being a single mum. I know plenty of single mothers out there, and they do a fine job at raising their children. There's no reason why your wife couldn't have raised that child on her own, with the help of her parents. One doesn't have to leap into marriage these days. Sandra was young, callow at the time, Mum. So yes, she's made some mistakes. And poor choices, but haven't we all? She's 30 now. She's the same age as me. She's been single since she was 18. So she's been very selective about who she's dated over the years. Well, I'm very relieved to hear you didn't go marrying an 18-year-old. For a moment I thought that was coming next, and that there would be a significant age gap between the two of you, which would have been a disaster waiting to happen. In my experience, few relationships survive a gaping big generation gap. It's like having a hole in your sock. Things never fit right. So how did she find her husband was cheating on her? As I assume he hid his infidelity from her well, being treacherously calculating like he so obviously is. Well, it was simple, really, if you must know, Mum. She went to visit her best friend, who was the matron of honour at her wedding. She was bringing her friend a present to thank her for her role she had played on their wedding day, and for her support. They had always been very close, like I was with my best friend until he did the dirty on me with Lydia. So our stories, ironically, are not unsimilar. Sandra got the shock of her life when she saw her husband's very distinctive bright red Jeep parked outside her best friend's house. She said she was overcome with a funny feeling that something very funny was up. Well, I'm not surprised. If I found your father's car parked outside my best friend's house, I would smell a very stinky rat. But luckily, I'm very fortunate because all my best friends would never betray my trust like your wife's best friend so obviously did. Who needs enemies if you have fair-weather friends like that? Good grief, the story gets worse by the second, let me tell you. Mum, please don't go there. Don't be so mean and unkind. I'm sure Sandra thought her friend could be trusted, but her friend was 18 at the time, was ignorantly naive, as she was. I guess her loyalty went flying out of the window. I understand all of Sandra's friends fancied her husband. He was very good-looking, I believe, and they drooled over him like ice cream sundaes. Oh, honestly, goodness gracious, Gulliver. I would say her best friend did more than let her down. Your wife must be an extremely poor judge of character, to befriend people who would backstab her like that so obviously. It's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, that's what it is. So, well, what happened? Did she catch them in the act? Please, God, don't tell me she did. I couldn't imagine anything worse. Just thinking about it makes me physically squirm. If I saw your father with another woman, I would squat her like a fly and kill your father at the very same time. Take them both out. You know me. I'd never put up with nonsense of any kind. That's why your father is very well trained. He would not dare press any of my buttons. Well, she had a key to her best friend's house, because she house-sits for her friend's ginger cat called Toby. So she let herself into the house, and heard strange noises coming from the bedroom. So she walked straight in, and there they were, otherwise engaged, so to speak, in a little hanky-panky, shall we say. Good Lord! What a dreadful, dreadful man! The poor woman was pregnant with his baby. He bogs off with the matron of honour, without so much as a bye or leave, 5 days after their wedding, to have his dirty little way with her behind his wife's back, while she's going through the most vulnerable time in her life carrying that baby. He sounds like a prize cad to me, in every sense of the word. He should be ashamed of himself. It's like something out of a Jerry Springer show. Your wife doesn't happen to have lived in a trailer, does she? Please, God, don't tell me you've married a woman who grew up in a trailer park. I don't think my heart could stand it if she came from that kind of impoverished background where anything goes to raise a buck or two. I mean, what would people think if they knew my son had married a loose woman? Mum, stop being so dramatic, will you? Relax. Sandra is not a loose woman, nor did she grow up in a trailer park. And so what if she did? Would it make her any less of a person? It's no blight to her character. So stop being such a dreadful snob. If you must know, Sandra comes from a small town in Vermont and was raised in a loving middle-class Christian family. I've met both of her parents and her 2 sisters, and the family are delightful. The whole lot of them are. They're well-educated, decent people. I hope that meets with your approval, Mum. Or is middle class not good enough for you? Don't be so reactive, Gulliver. I'm only asking, love. I mean, if your wife was well-educated, would she have made such poor choices, I ask you? I can't help but wonder about that. Unless, of course, well, she's not desperately bright, if you know what I mean. Mum, Sandra is very bright. She was 18 at the time. Cut her some slack, will you? She was a teenager. You know what teenagers are like. They don't always make the wisest decisions. Besides all that, her parents were extremely religious, and they did not want her to have an abortion. She was dead set against it, as were they. I think she really believed she could make the marriage work, for the baby's sake. To her credit, at least she gave her marriage a fighting chance, which is more than can be said for a lot of other girls. Did she even love that man, I wonder, Gulliver? Well, she didn't know him very well. He does have a name, Mum. His name was Ed Slater. They had seen each other a couple of times, and then she fell pregnant. They decided to make a go of things, but things sadly didn't work out for them. Good grief, son. The story gets more and more Jerry Springer-like by the second. Your wife married a man she barely knew because he impregnated her. Because she threw herself at him. That's a foolish thing to do. Incredibly naive. If she was going to sleep with every single man on the planet, did she at not least have some birth control at her disposal? Did her mother not at least give her some advice on how to conduct herself around very frisky men? I'm sorry, son. I'm saying it as it is. Mum, it happened a long time ago. It's all water under the bridge now. Let's move on, shall we? Well, I hope for your sake, Gulliver, it is water under the bridge. Because for your information, water has the unfortunate capacity to do an insane amount of damage, especially if it comes back to haunt you in a flood of chaos. I've seen it all too often in people's relationships, you know. And frankly, Gulliver, I'm very disappointed and very disheartened that you chose to clandestinely get married to this woman, without including me or your father in the ceremony that you went to in Vegas. Fair enough, I understand if you wanted a small event. I can respect that, to a certain extent. But not including us in the ceremony, on such an important day in your life, makes me feel as if me and your father have been snubbed. And that really hurts, love. Really hurts. Mum, it wasn't clandestine. One of the reasons I didn't tell you I was getting remarried is I knew the news would upset you. If you had your way, you would have encouraged Lydia and I to reconcile the old flame and try again. And I'm sorry, that's never going to happen. You've always thought that Lydia could do no wrong. I've got news for you, Mum. Lydia really hurt me, cheating on me in the way she did. I don't care a jot if she was inebriated. There is no excuse for her behaviour. Beyond that, she completely destroyed the relationship I had with my best friend, because I haven't spoken to him since. Well, it's too late now to persuade you to make up with Lydia, isn't it, son? You've made that painfully clear. You've only gone and married somebody else. I hope to God you know what you're doing, Gulliver. Anyway, I must go. I have to break this very sensitive news to your father, and frankly, I do not know how he's going to take it. I'm sure he'll be fine, Mum. Dad's never been that social. He's probably secretly relieved he didn't have to fly all the way to Vegas to witness our wedding. I'm sure I spared him a lot of grief and unnecessary expense. Because, like me, he's also shrewd with his pocketbook, and doesn't like spending too much money, apart from where you're concerned. So when are we going to meet this wife of yours, Gulliver? Are you going to keep us in the dark indefinitely, or are we going to see you soon? Don't you worry, Mum. I'll bring her to stay with you and Dad next weekend. You'll love her. We'll come up to the coast for 2 or 3 days. How about that? Very well. I'll see you then.
So there you are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.